The year was 1870, and Dust Creek was the kind of town that didn't forgive a woman for aging. The sun showed no mercy on the parched, clapboard buildings, and neither did the townsfolk. Wind bit through the cracks in Clara Harlan's room above the trading post, rattling the window panes like bones in a gambler's cup. She stood before the mirror, though it did little good. The glass was cracked through the middle, splitting her reflection in two. On one side, the woman she'd once been, and on the other, the one the world now chose to see. She touched the gray streak along her temple. Her skin, once the color of rose milk, had deepened with sun and years. 45, twice widowed, no children. They said she was too proud, too strange, too old. She was none of those things. Only tired. Tired of being measured by a past she didn't mourn, tired of being pitted by women who'd never had to bury a husband in the dead of winter, and tired of the way men looked through her as if she were already fading into dust. A gunshot cracked the air outside. Clara flinched, the sound too close and too real. She moved to the window, careful not to disturb the lace curtain. In the dusty street below, a man was being dragged from a saloon by two others, each with a hand twisted in his coat. Blood dripped from his mouth as he tried to speak. No one moved to help him. Another shot rang out. The man dropped limp. The gunman turned his back, holstered his weapon, and walked away like he'd just swatted a fly. Clara's hand trembled at the window frame, but her face remained composed. This was Dust Creek. Justice wore no badge here. And mercy? That died with the last winter. By noon, the post bustled with heat and suspicion. The doors creaked every time someone entered, dragging in dust and tension with them. Clara stood behind the wooden counter, arranging the jars of medicine salves and tinctures she'd spent the last 2 months making. Comfort for wounds. White willow bark for pain. Things men dismissed until they bled. Selling poison again, Miss Harland? Sneered Amos Pritchard as he passed, spitting tobacco juice near her boots. Heard you made one batch too strong for your last husband. Clara didn't blink. Careful, Amos. You'd be surprised what's strong enough to finish the week. The men at the bar chuckled low and mean. Her eyes caught the reflection of a younger woman behind her, a girl of about 25 with golden curls and a low neckline, laughing too hard at something a bearded man said. Clara turned away, heart steady. She'd been that girl once. Pretty, hopeful, and foolish enough to believe that youth bought love. From the corner, a little boy limped in, barefoot and red-eyed. Tommy, she said, crouching behind the counter. What happened? Fell. Ma says we don't got no money for doctor and... Clara nodded. You don't need a doctor. She pulled a jar from beneath the shelf and gently spread the comfort paste on his knee, wrapping it in clean linen. The boy winced, then smiled. You got hands like my granny's quilt, he whispered. She kissed the top of his head and sent him on his way. The calm didn't last. A sudden shout erupted outside, followed by the unmistakable sound of a rifle cocking. She reached beneath the counter, fingers wrapping around the old revolver she'd kept hidden for years. Her heart galloped, but her grip was steady. Then came the sound of boots, hard, fast. A man staggered through the door, shoulder bloodied, eyes wild. Behind him, 2 others followed with pistols raised. The first man stumbled toward her, ducked behind a crate. Don't! Clara shouted, stepping between him and the others. Move! Barked one of the pursuers, face hidden beneath a bandana. Her eyes narrowed. I said no. He raised his weapon. Too late. A shot rang out from the shadows near the back door. One of the gunmen dropped, screaming, blood soaking his thigh. The other turned, but another bullet caught him square in the chest, dropping him like a sack of flour. Silence fell thick and sudden. The shooter stepped forward, lowering his rifle. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and ragged from trail wear. A long coat hung from his frame, dusted with grit, a scar carved through his brow, just over the left eye, and his gaze was ice-calm despite the smoke curling around them. Clara kept her revolver raised. Who the hell are you? He looked her in the eye, really looked, not through her. Name's James Mallory. You just helped save my life. You dragged that trouble in here. I tried to keep it outside, he said, kneeling to check the man he'd shot in the thigh. But they brought it to you. She didn't lower her gun. He raised an eyebrow. You gonna shoot me for helping? She hesitated, then slid the revolver back under the counter. Only if your aim starts wandering. James grinned. Fair enough. By nightfall, Dust Creek buzzed with fresh gossip. Some said Clara had taken a man into the room. Others whispered she'd paid the raiders off to look brave. No one asked her the truth. They never had. The fire started just after midnight. She woke to the smell of smoke, thick and bitter. Flames curled beneath the doorframe, light flickering along the floorboards. She grabbed her satchel, only what she could carry, and kicked the window out with the heel of her boot. Downstairs, the boarding house burned like a dry leaf. Shouts rang out, but no help came. Just a few onlookers watching from porches, arms crossed. The townsfolk of Dust Creek always loved a good fire, especially when it came for someone they didn't care to keep. James was already at her side by the time she reached the alley, leading a saddled horse. Looks like someone sent a message, he said. Clara stared at the blaze, jaw clenched. Message received. You've got enemies now. I've had enemies for 20 years, she said, climbing onto the horse. They just changed their names. He handed her a canteen and a wrapped parcel of bread. I've got a place out west, beyond Red Canyon. She arched an eyebrow. What's out there? Land. Quiet. Safety, maybe. No people, if that's what you want. And why would you offer that to a woman you barely know? James adjusted his hat, eyes never leaving hers. Because when those bastards came in guns drawn, you didn't flinch. You stepped between me and death. That's worth something. Clara looked back at the flames, watched as the roof collapsed in a fiery sigh. Everything she owned turned to ash in an instant. Her herbs, her books, her letters from Missouri, all gone. She turned back to James. All right, I'll ride. They rode out before dawn, leaving Dust Creek behind. The town shrank into morning mist, becoming little more than a rumor behind them. Clara didn't look back. Not once. She didn't need to. What she'd lost in Dust Creek hadn't been worth keeping. What lay ahead, whatever it was, couldn't be worse than the slow dying she'd lived these past 5 years. As the sun rose over the scarred horizon, James rode beside her in silence. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Dust swirled behind them, fading like a memory, and Clara felt the weight of the mirror crack fade from her shoulders. She wasn't pretty anymore, not by the town's measure, but for the first time in years, she felt like someone worth saving. And that was something no mirror could show. The sun had barely crested the hills when Clara and James rode out beyond the last sign of Dust Creek, its smoldering hatred shrinking in the distance. Wind swept across the mesa, dry as bone and just as cruel. The land stretched for miles, brittle grasses, stunted mesquites, and buttes rising like sleeping giants on the horizon. It was land that didn't offer forgiveness, only survival. Clara didn't mind. She'd had her fill of men who promised mercy. James rode slightly ahead, silent except for the occasional scan of the ridgeline. His Winchester sat across his saddle like a second spine. He had the bearing of a man who'd seen too much, and though he never said it, Clara knew he rode not only against danger but toward penance. They didn't talk much that first day. Words felt out of place in that stretch of country where even the wind seemed cautious. They stopped under the shadow of a bluff near sunset. Clara built a modest fire while James hunted supper. He returned with 2 quail, one already cleaned. She seasoned the meat with salt from her pouch and sage she'd plucked earlier. He watched her work, surprised. You cook like someone who's done this a while, he said. She glanced at him, then at the fire. When you're alone long enough, you learn to feed yourself. The trick is making something taste like more than dirt and regret. He chuckled softly. It was the first time she'd heard it, a sound that didn't belong to the man with the rifle or the scar. It belonged to someone before that. They ate in silence, save for the snap of fire and distant calls of coyotes. When the flames burned low, she wrapped herself in a blanket near the edge of the firelight. I don't need guarding, she said. James leaned against a boulder, boots crossed. Didn't say you did. The stars hung low that night, close enough to scrape the earth. Clara stared up at them until sleep stole her away. By the third day, their silences began to feel less like caution and more like comfort. The land forced a kind of honesty between them. There was no town to hide in, no window to catch your better angle. Just the wind, your scars, and the choices you made before morning. They crossed a rocky ravine by noon. Clara's mare stumbled on loose shale, nearly unseating her. James reached over, steadying her reins. "You all right?" "I've been thrown harder," she muttered, annoyed more by herself than the horse. "You ride stiff." She shot him a glance. "You scout every woman's posture?" He didn't smile. "Only the ones I don't want falling off a cliff." That night, they camped beside a stream choked with brush and hidden roots. Clara took off her boots and waded into the water to wash. Her dress clung to her legs as she knelt to scrub her arms. The cold bit into her bones, but she welcomed it. James stood on the bank, back turned. She knew he was there, listening, watching the shadows behind her, but never her silhouette. He was careful like that. When she stepped out, shivering, he handed her a dry blanket without comment. "You were a soldier," she said as she dried off. He nodded, eyes on the fire. "Union Scout. Missouri Volunteers. My first husband fought for the North. Died in Franklin. You lose anyone?" James took a long moment before answering. "Wife. Raiders. 5 years ago. I'm sorry." He looked over the flames, voice quiet. "She wasn't made for this land. I tried to build her a home. The land had other plans." Clara stared into the flames. "This land doesn't care about your dreams." He met her eyes then, as if truly seeing her for the first time. "No," he said, "but sometimes it gives you something else." The river came on the 6th day, swollen from rains upriver. Mud churned at its edges. The current was fast, fierce, and lined with broken trees like toothpicks in a child's tantrum. "We'll have to swim it," James said, scanning the banks. Clara stiffened. "I can't." "You can't or you won't?" "I nearly drowned once. When I was 15. "I don't." She stopped herself, jaw set. James didn't push. Instead, he slid from his saddle and began tying their packs together with oilcloth and rope. "I'll go first with the horses. Then I'll come back for you." Clara watched him guide the horses into the water. They struggled, hooves churning, but James stayed steady. By the time he returned, soaked and breathless, she stood frozen on the riverbank. He offered his hand. "You trust me?" "No." "Good. Trust yourself, then." She gripped his wrist. He pulled her in. The current hit like a wall. Panic clawed at her throat. Water surged over her head. She kicked, screamed, but swallowed only river and fear. James was beside her, shouting something she couldn't hear. He grabbed her by the waist, held her tight as they drifted toward a fallen log. She clung to the bark with raw fingers, every muscle shaking. When they finally scrambled to shore, she collapsed on her knees, coughing until her lungs burned. James knelt beside her. "You did it." She slapped him across the face. He didn't move, didn't even flinch. She stared at her hand, breathing hard. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Don't be." He stood. "You needed that more than I did." She cried that night, not from fear or pain, but from the flood of everything she'd bottled for years. Loss, rage, loneliness. James didn't come close, didn't offer words. He simply stoked the fire and stayed beside her until she slept. By the 9th day, they had fallen into rhythm. Silent mornings, shared work, sharp-eyed nights. Trust formed not through words but through acts. He gave her space. She gave him presence. Somewhere between trail dust and campfire smoke, something unspoken began to form. Clara found herself studying him. The way his fingers flexed before drawing a weapon, the way he slept with his boots on, his rifle within arm's reach. His hands were strong, but his eyes gave him away. Tired, always calculating. "You still see her?" Clara asked one evening, gesturing to the sketchbook he kept half hidden in his saddlebag. He hesitated, then handed it to her. Inside, pages of pencil drawings, animals, canyons, maps, and one page, a woman's face soft and serene. His wife, young, hopeful, untouched by the West's cruelty. Clara traced the outline gently. You're good. Not good enough to save her. No drawing can save the dead, she said, but it can keep them honest. He looked at her then, and for the first time, she felt the weight of his gaze. It wasn't desire. Not yet. It was recognition. That night, the coyotes didn't howl. The land held its breath. On the 12th day, the desert changed. Canyons gave way to sage plains, and the wind carried a new scent, wood smoke, distant but sharp. James stopped his horse, nostrils flaring. Raiders, he muttered. He dismounted, pressed his hand to the ground. 3 horses. Heavy. They didn't speak again as they circled a ridge and found the remains of a camp, still warm, ash-shifting. 3 sets of tracks. One had a limp. Clara felt her stomach twist. They followed us? James nodded. The man I shot in Dust Creek. His kin. They'll ride through the night. They didn't run. They planned. James showed her how to fire his spare rifle. Her aim was shaky, but she hit the stump twice. He didn't praise her. He didn't need to. Her hands stopped trembling. That night, they waited in silence. Horses picketed. Fire low. James sat with his rifle cradled, eyes on the dark. Clara sat beside him. You still think I'm too old to matter? She asked. He turned to her, the fire painting his face in soft orange. I think age has nothing to do with what you carry inside. She leaned forward, voice low. And what do you see in me? He didn't answer right away. When he did, it was soft. I see fire. Not the kind that burns out, the kind that endures. Their lips met, not out of hunger, but recognition. It wasn't a kiss to awaken something new. It was a kiss to acknowledge what had already bloomed. Dawn broke cold and gray. The raiders came just after sunrise, 2 riders, rifles drawn, faces hard. James raised his gun. Clara was already behind cover. The first shot cracked the morning like thunder. Clara fired once. Missed. James took one through the shoulder, but stayed upright. She didn't panic. She loaded, aimed again. This time she hit. One man fell. The other turned and ran. James dropped to one knee, blood soaking his shirt. Clara ran to him, pressing her hands to the wound. You're not dying. Not after all this. He smiled faintly. Wouldn't dream of it. She bound the wound with strips from her skirt, hands steady, voice low. We're not done. You hear me? Not even close. He nodded once before slipping into unconsciousness. She sat beside him, gun in her lap, eyes on the horizon. And when the sun rose high, casting fire across the canyon walls, she stayed still as stone, guarding what mattered. For the first time in years, Clara Harland was no longer running from the world. She was ready to face it. The land beyond the Red Canyon rolled wide and open, a sea of dry grass bending beneath the wind, each stalk whispering secrets of those who had come before. Clara Harland rode slowly, her horse moving in step with the steady rise and fall of the prairie. James Mallory lay slumped in the saddle beside her, pale and quiet, though not yet lost. Blood soaked the bandage across his shoulder, but the fever hadn't taken hold. Not yet. By the time she saw the ranch, it didn't look like much. A single cabin nestled in the crook of a bluff, fencing half done, 2 lean-to sheds, a windmill creaking as it turned. The place looked as wounded as the man who'd built it, but Clara's eyes softened at the sight. It wasn't beauty she saw, it was effort, something made by hand, something worth finishing. She helped James down, eased him onto the porch, then kicked open the door with the heel of her boot. Inside, it smelled of cedar and thyme, old leather, gun oil dust, a table, a bed, shelves packed with dry beans and salt pork. Not much, but enough. She worked through the night, cleaned his wound, boiled water, changed linens. Her hands never hesitated. When the fever came, she whispered through it, called him back, told him stories, not from her past, but from his made-up tales of what this land might still become, how this cabin could grow into something more than a stop between dangers. He woke 2 days later, said nothing at first, just stared at her through the haze, then whispered, "You stayed?" She didn't flinch, wasn't planning to bury another man so soon. His smile was weak, but it reached his eyes. They fell into routine, one that didn't ask for explanation. Clara worked the garden patch behind the cabin, coaxing life from stubborn ground. She mended the front step, patched the cabin roof. James, still weak, taught her how to repair the well crank, how to spot sickness in cattle, how to watch the tree line for signs of men who came with shadows. They said little, but each act built a kind of bridge between them. When he slept, she found the sketchbook again, noticed a new page, her face drawn in charcoal. Not soft, not young, but strong. The lines of her jaw, the set of her shoulders. It was a woman no mirror had ever shown her. One evening, she caught him watching her as she boiled coffee over the fire. The air was cooling fast, the sky bruised with dusk. "What do you see?" he asked, voice low. She stirred the pot. "In the coffee? In yourself." She didn't answer right away. She looked up, met his gaze across the flame. A woman who stopped waiting to be seen. His breath caught. Then he nodded, as if that was the truth he'd been hoping to hear. That night, he kissed her again, gentle, lingering. It wasn't desperation. It was the kind of kiss that came after days of silence and labor. It said, "You're not alone." It said, "I see you." But peace was never made to last long in the frontier. The rider came just before dawn, silhouetted against the rising sun. Clara spotted him from the ridge, where she was hanging damp linens. A lone horse, fast, urgent. The way the man sat, rigid, hunting. She dropped the clothespin, ran for the house. James met her at the door, rifle already in hand. "He's found us," she said. He nodded. "Maybe just scouting." Clara shook her head. "No, he's not alone. Not this time." They made ready. James loaded cartridges with trembling fingers. Clara packed water, bandaged his shoulder fresh. She pulled on her boots, her old revolver at her side. When the second and third riders appeared an hour later, she didn't flinch. James grimaced, leaning on the table for balance. "They want me. You can ride. Now, you'll be long gone before they reach the ridge." She looked at him like he'd spoken nonsense. "I didn't fight my way here to run now. You don't owe me this, Clara." "I don't owe you," she agreed. "But I'm not done yet." They set the trap in silence. James showed her how to circle them toward the canyon trail, a narrow bend behind the cabin where a rockfall could be coaxed. Clara scattered oil by the shed and rigged the door with a lantern and a match. It wasn't perfect, but it didn't need to be. The first rider reached the gate by late morning, called out James's name with a drawl soaked in hate. James leaned against the cabin door frame, rifle across his arm. "Took you long enough, Dwight. Didn't take kindly to you shooting my brother in Dust Creek. He tried to kill me." Dwight smiled. "Well, I'm here to return the favor." The second man flanked left. The third circled behind. Clara waited in the brush near the trail, breath steady, finger on the trigger. She wasn't afraid. Not anymore. The first shot came from Dwight. James ducked, fired back, then dropped behind the porch. Gunfire exploded across the clearing. Clara moved fast. As the second man charged the shed, she waited until he yanked the door open. The lantern tipped. The oil caught. Flames bloomed. The man screamed, staggered back, gun lost. James took the shot from the porch, hit him in the leg. He went down hard. But the third man came fast, faster than she expected. He was younger, leaner, and he saw her before she could shift position. He raised his rifle. She shot first. One shot through the shoulder. He dropped the gun, fell into the dirt with a scream. Not dead, but no longer a threat. Only Dwight remained. The fire crackled. Smoke filled the air. The horses bucked against their ties. Clara stepped out from the trail, revolver aimed at Dwight's back. "Drop it." He turned slowly, eyes narrowing. "You." "She." He smiled. "You won't shoot." "Try me." He raised the gun. She didn't hesitate. The bullet hit him in the gut. He crumpled, cursing, gasping for breath. James limped forward. "Let me finish it." Clara held up a hand. "No." James looked at her. "He'll come back." "No," she said, stepping closer. "He won't." She knelt beside Dwight, staring him in the eye as he choked. You think I'm just some dried-up woman who outlived her usefulness, she said softly. But I outlived men better than you. His lips curled in a snarl, but the fight in his eyes faded. He passed before the hour was out. They buried the dead beneath the cliff, beside old trees that had stood through worse. That night, the wind carried no threat. James leaned against the porch post, arm wrapped in fresh cloth. Clara stood beside him, face turned to the sky. You saved me, he said. She looked at him. We saved each other. He reached for her hand. She let him take it. What do you see in yourself now? He asked, voice quiet. She thought a long time before answering. A woman no longer ashamed to burn. He nodded. Then I'll burn beside you. The fire inside her had never truly gone out. It had just been buried beneath grief and silence and years of watching the world pass her by. But now it burned brighter than it ever had, not the flame of a girl chasing love, but the slow, steady blaze of a woman who had found something better. Herself. So, what do we take from this tale? Maybe it's this: the frontier didn't just break the weak. It tested the strong. It didn't care if you were young or pretty or chosen. It asked only one thing: will you endure? Clara Harlan did more than endure. She lit a fire in a place where everything was meant to die, and it never went out. If her story moved you, if it lit something in you too, then share it. Because no fire survives alone. Dawn broke with a cold sharpness that cut deeper than any blade Clara had ever known. The air was still, heavy with a silence that didn't feel natural. It was the kind of quiet that preceded something or someone dangerous. She stood alone on the porch, rifle slung over her shoulder, eyes on the horizon where mist curled low over the land like ghost smoke. James slept inside, still healing, though too proud to say it out loud. His wound had closed, but his strength hadn't returned, not enough to ride, not enough to fight. Clara hadn't told him what she'd seen 2 nights ago, the shimmer of firelight beyond the northern rise. She hadn't told him about the hoof prints she found circling the property line or the mark carved into the barn door, 3 slashes, angled like a crow's talon. She recognized the sign. It wasn't just vengeance anymore. It was a bounty. They were being hunted. She stepped off the porch and walked the fence line, fingers brushing the rough-hewn posts as she went. Her boots crunched on frost-hardened ground, and her breath clouded in the air. Every step settled her resolve. She didn't come this far to die running. She didn't come this far to die as anyone but herself. Inside, James stirred. He sat up slowly, winced, and swung his legs over the bed. You're up early, he said, voice hoarse. She turned as she entered the cabin, shut the door behind her. Didn't sleep. His eyes narrowed. You felt it too. She nodded. He reached for his boots. If they're coming, we face them together. You're not ready. I'm not staying in this bed while you fight my battle. It's our battle now, she said quieter. They shared a long look, the kind only formed after fire and blood and nights spent watching each other breathe, waiting for death to pass them over. He relented first, sat back, but his eyes never left her. How many, he asked. I'd wager 4. Maybe 5. Mercenaries? Bounty men. Dust Creek's dead. Dwight's gang is buried. But word spreads fast when there's coin to be made off a scarred rancher and an older woman with a reputation. James leaned back with a sigh. So be it. That afternoon, they prepared. Clara oiled the hinges on the barn doors, checked the snares, scattered caltrops across the eastern approach where riders would least expect them. James, slower, handled the ammo, counted shells, sharpened blades. They spoke little. They didn't need to. At dusk, Clara lit only one lantern and hung it in the center of the cabin window, a silent challenge to any who might be watching. We're here. We're waiting. Night fell fast, dragging with it the bite of winter. The land hushed. No wind. No owls. Even the coyotes held their songs. Then hooves. At first faint, distant, almost uncertain. Then closer. Clara stood behind the overturned table, rifle ready. James knelt behind the hearth, pistol drawn, face pale with pain. She whispered, "They'll expect the man to lead. Let them." The first rider broke the tree line in shadow. No torch, just movement. then another. 4 in total, just as she'd guessed. They moved with the precision of men who'd done this before. Surround, silence, strike. But this wasn't a saloon or a sleepy stagecoach. This was her land now, and she'd made it ready. One stepped toward the barn. The snare snapped. A shout rang out as the man fell. Leg crushed in the iron trap Clara had hidden beneath the straw. Gunfire erupted. James fired from the hearth, clipped the second rider's shoulder as he dismounted. Clara hit the third square in the thigh as he lunged for the porch. He dropped, cursing, crawling back toward cover. But the fourth, tall, lean, quiet, made it through the front door. He moved like smoke, blade in hand, eyes like stone. Clara turned just in time to parry with the rifle stock. He slashed, missed by inches. She didn't flinch. They struggled, her rifle between them, his blade slicing the air just above her neck. She kicked his knee. Hard, he staggered. She turned the rifle, pulled the trigger point blank. Click. Misfire. He grinned. She swung instead, but of the gun cracking across his jaw. He fell back, dazed. James tried to stand. Too slow. The man rose again, knife glinting. Clara grabbed the kettle from a hearth, boiling with water, and hurled it full force. Steam exploded, and the man screamed, clutching his face. James fired once, clean through the chest. The mercenary dropped like cut timber. Silence returned, heavy and full. The others had fled. Clara dropped the rifle, chest heaving. Blood dripped from her forearm, shallow slice. Nothing deep, nothing that would stop her. James limped toward her. You all right? She nodded. He looked down at the man's body. That one wasn't in it for the money. He wanted the kill. Clara didn't speak. Her hands were steady, but her eyes were distant. He touched her cheek gently. You did more than survive tonight. You saved this place. Her voice was low. They'll keep coming. They always do. He waited a moment, then asked, Would you leave? If I ask, she shook her head. Not anymore. Later, as they buried the bodies, Clara worked in silence. Her blouse torn, her hair damp with sweat, boots soaked through with mud. James tried to lift the final corpse, but his knees gave. Clara took over without a word. Together, they rolled the last man into the pit, covered it, marked nothing. The stars were sharp that night, the moon a thin silver blade. James poured water over her hands, his own trembling. You're not who you were in Dust Creek, he said. She looked at him, dust on her face, blood on her sleeves. I burned that woman down with the rest of the town. And what rose from her ashes? He asked. She thought for a long moment. Then, someone who doesn't need permission to be dangerous. He nodded, eyes full. She added, someone who no longer waits to be loved or needed or seen. He smiled at that. And yet, I see you clearer than anything. They stood together beneath the open sky, no words left, no lies between them. Only earth, breath, and the fire that still flickered inside them both. Clara turned her face to the wind. It wasn't a wind of promise. It was a wind of warning. But it didn't frighten her. She had become the warning. The West didn't forgive the weak, but it bowed, sometimes, to the ones who refused to fall. And Clara Harland had never learned how to stay down.